I'm going to begin with just a little bit of history about the Woodford Mansion and how we decided to restore the Bowfat in Woodford's parlor. And I'm going to then next turn things over to Jonathan Stevens, who would describe his investigations of the closet and what he did to restore it to its 18th century appearance. Next slide, please. Next slide. So first, a little background. The Woodford Mansion is a National Historic Landmark that is located in East Fairmount Park in the city of Philadelphia. It was built between 1756 and 1758 and greatly expanded beginning in 1771. Woodford was a summer home to several notable early Philadelphia merchants and their families. And these include William Coleman, Alexander Barclay, David Franks, and Isaac Wharton. In 1869, the mansion was acquired by the city of Philadelphia's Fairmount Park Commission as the commission was creating Fairmount Park. The commission initially used the mansion as a residence for the chief engineer, but eventually the commission turned it over to the Fairmount Park Guards, who were the park police for the park back in that era. And the photo that you're looking at here shows the mansion as it appeared in the 1920s. Not long before the commission decided to move the Fairmount Park Guards out of the mansion and turn it over to the Naomi Wood Trust to become a historic house museum. Next slide, please. Now, the event that prompted this action by the commission was the sesquicentennial. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now, Jeff.
Okay, I think that something just went off on my screen here. So the event that prompted this action was the sesquicentennial celebration of our independence, which took place in Philadelphia. And the image you see on the left is a souvenir brochure from the sesquicentennial. The image you see on the right is an image of the High Street exhibit, which was one of the most popular exhibits of the sesquicentennial celebration. It was a recreation of High Street, which is now Market Street, one of the main commercial corridors of 18th century Philadelphia. And the organizers built replicas of 18th century buildings, which were furnished with furniture and household goods donated by Philadelphia families. It's a very popular exhibit, and the organization and then execution of this project increased the interest in many civic leaders and the Fairmount Park Commission in doing something to restore the Fairmount Park houses and turn them into historic house museums. Next slide, please. And so here you see on the left an image of Naomi Wood. Naomi Wood was the founder of the Naomi Wood Trust. She passed away in 1926. And in her will, she had left her fortune and her collection of 18th century furniture and decorative arts to create a trust to acquire a historic house museum and install the collection there. This was a plan she'd had for many years and shared with her friend, who's pictured on the right, Daniel Huntoon. And Huntoon was also a collector of 18th century furniture and dec arts. And they had long partnered in collecting trips together. And he was our first trustee. So in 1926, she passes. He has a collection in search of a home. The Fairmount Park Commission has a home in search of a collection. And so Huntoon negotiated with them. And in 1927, the commission turned over control of the Woodford Mansion to the Naomi Wood Trust. And then the trust began renovating it to transform it into a historic house museum. Next slide. So the man that Huntoon had engaged to be the architect and oversee the renovation is pictured on our left, and his name is John Sinclair. He was an excellent choice for this position in that he had worked on the sesquicentennial celebration and designing that, and he had also served as the city architect for the city of Philadelphia, and he had done work on the renovation of Congress Hall in the Independence Hall complex, and had other experiences in historic renovation. So Huntoon spent the next 3 years supervising the renovation of the mansion. Fortunately, most of the historic spaces were largely intact, but he had to do a lot of work to get new electrical and mechanical systems installed. He also made some alterations, though, to the mansion. You see just to the right of his portrait, an airlock porch that he created at the rear of the house to serve as the main entrance. A 20th century kitchen that he added in an addition to the rear of the house so that the caretakers could have a modern kitchen to eat in. And then above that was both a bedroom and a full bath. On the second floor, and that's to the right of the kitchen, you see an image of a public restroom that he installed. And then on the third floor, in the attic garret, he installed another bedroom and a full bath. Next slide, please. Another area that were affected by Sinclair's renovations was in the parlor. And here we believe that he altered the original 18th century closet. And this closet had been interpreted for many years as a built-in bookcase. And there was a collection of mostly 19th century books in that space. Most of those books, we believe, were purchased by the Naomi Wood or by Huntoon. And so it had been assumed by many that this was just part of the original furnishings of the house. When Kristen Regina, my wife, took over as trustee, she was skeptical as to whether or not this was actually a book closet. So we took out the books, and what we found was that this shelving was obviously 20th century shelving. It had metal brackets at either end and adjustable shelves to hold all the books on it, and did not appear to be an 18th century closet. And so we then had to figure out what exactly this closet was used for. Next slide, please. So we started doing some research, and our research revealed that there were similar parlor closets in 18th century colonial homes. These were generally designed to serve as a china closet, and here are two examples from colonial Williamsburg. And these closets existed because during this period, it was not yet fashionable to have a separate room for dining. And so a china closet or Bowfat was a common feature of the home of a wealthy person. And it was used to store and display porcelain, Delftware, silver, pewter, and other objects that would be used for dining. Next slide. Here are some examples of some Bowfats in Philadelphia area homes. On the left, you'll see a Bowfat from Stenton. In the middle, you'll see one from Mount Pleasant, also in Fairmount Park, very close to us. On the right, one from Grumblethorpe up in Germantown. Next slide, please. And so we decided to have the 20th century shelving and the backing material in the closet removed so we could see what might remain there. When we did so, we exposed the original 18th century wood backing for the closet. And you can see on the left, the kind of parlor as existed back then. On the right, one of the workmen from the Fairmount Park Conservancy as he's removing the 20th century material that overlaid the 18th century closet back wall. Next slide. Now here's the close-up of that back wall of the closet. And as you look at it, there's some visible traces of multiple paint layers and spacing between the original, where the original shelves used to be. And that blue appeared to be the earliest a level of exposed paint. And so our hope was that this might be the original paint color. We had a first round of paint analysis done by Frank Welsh, and his report showed the existence of an 18th century Prussian blue paint color on this wall. And so based on that, and based on the on the appearance of the wood there and the evidence of shelving, we decided that we wanted to convert this into a china closet again. And so we made a plan to bring in a conservator and do this restoration. And this work was undertaken by Jonathan Stevens beginning in January of this year. And so I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Jonathan, who can discuss what he found.
Thanks for the wonderful introduction to the project, Jeff.
Sure thing.
Today, I'm going to take you through the evidence and discoveries found during my work conserving and restoring Woodford's parlor closet. As with any changes made to a historically significant structure like Woodford, it was important that any restoration of or addition of new material to the closet be based on sound physical evidence. As just described, the Conservancy's removal of the 1920s bookshelf revealed a wealth of material evidence. The back of the closet was lined with beaded panels joined to one another with tongue and groove joinery. The panels are installed in 5 rows of varying heights and are nailed to the rough-sawn structural backboards of the closet. A panel removed for initial examination, you can see the void in the middle of the image on the left, was observed to have several generations of paint on its front. It was rough-sawn and partially hand-planed on its back, and it was nailed to the back of the closet using wrought iron nails, all typical of mid-18th century construction. The panels were made from Atlantic white cedar, as confirmed by microscopic characterization carried out by my friend and colleague, Conservator Sarah Towers at Colonial Williamsburg. The rows of paneling had 3 horizontal gaps between them, indicated by arrows above, that we hypothesized were housings for now missing shelves. The sidewalls were still covered with some of the 1920s bookshelf material, including a paper-covered solid core wooden wall covering material that was used similarly to how we use drywall today. Hard yellow pine sidewalls, which were spaced away from the original structural sidewalls of the closet using nailed together wooden boards at intervals. Paint analysis was carried out by analyst Kirsten Travers Moffat to supplement initial paint analysis performed by now retired analyst Frank Welsh, as Jeff mentioned. Cross-sectional microscopy allows the study of the layers of paint within a small sample under magnification, analogous to the layers of a layer cake that are revealed when the cake is sliced. Photomicrographs of paint cross-sections allow us to compare the paint histories of samples from different locations visually. The cross-section at left shows the paint history on a sample from the closet's back wall paneling, from the most recent green, seen at the top of the sample, down to the earliest paint generation, a gray primer and light blue paint layer. These photomicrographs show the earliest layers from the same sample in greater magnification, including the cells of the wood that the closet panel is made from. Kirsten also analyzed the earliest blue paint layer using polarized light microscopy, a technique that involves viewing a crushed up pigment sample under a specific type of filtered illumination that can reveal identifying characteristics of certain materials. The pigments identified in the closet panel's earliest blue layer were lead white, which has been in use since antiquity, and Prussian blue, a compound containing iron and cyanide that was first introduced in 1704 and was used in architectural finishes through the 18th and 19th centuries. The earliest generation of blue paint was also visible to the naked eye at areas of paint loss throughout the surviving closet wall paneling, including at the base of the closet's back panels. This is notable because the paint scheme of the woodwork in the parlor itself and throughout Woodford more generally had been found by previous analysis to have a darker strip painted across the base of the paneling, moldings, and doors, as seen on the left. The presence of this blue paint at the base of the closet wall back paneling suggests that this convention was not continued within the closet. It also suggests that when the closet was first painted, the wall paneling simply abutted the closet's floorboards, as we see here, without the transition of an applied baseboard, although evidence of a later applied baseboard can be seen. The earliest blue paint color is also visible on the interior faces of the two closet doors, including at the base, seen at right, suggesting that they were also painted blue in their entirety and lacked the dark painted base strip seen elsewhere in the house. Additionally, the closet-facing side of the door hinges also retained visible evidence of the earliest light blue paint color. While the surviving woodwork and paint history provided a remarkable wealth of evidence about the closet's original configuration and appearance, the form of the closet shelves was still a matter of speculation. Built-in closets survive, as Jeff showed in these examples before, with ornately shaped shelves and molded edges, including these examples at Stenton, Mount Pleasant, and Grumblethorpe in Philadelphia. And also with simpler, straight across square edge shelves, including these examples at historic St. George's United Methodist Church in Old City, and also in Woodford Mansion's dining room next to the mantel. Fortunately for us, the thrift or resourcefulness of the workers who carried out the 1920s bookshelf modification of the closet resulted in the preservation of some incredibly important physical information. When I removed the 1920s era sidewall material, I found that the boards that had been used to space that material away from the original sidewalls of the closet, indicated with red arrows above, appeared to have a very similar paint history to the surviving back wall panels, and that many of those boards were the same thickness as the horizontal spaces between the rows of paneling on the back wall. Additionally, the removal of the 20th century material revealed two surviving side panels, indicated by green arrows above, which were similar in appearance and construction to the back panels, but did not have beaded edges or tongue and groove joinery. The spacer boards were removed from the sidewalls and were examined. I found that many of the boards had been split apart along their length and could be pieced together to form wider board fragments, including several that were comparable to the depth of the closet. It appeared that the carpenters who modified the closet in the 1920s had cut some of the original shelves into shorter fragments, the correct length to create spacers that would span the width of the closet sidewalls, and then split those fragments to quickly create spacers that they needed to bring the closet sidewalls closer to one another. The pieced together fragment pictured above was unpainted at the very back edge on the top and bottom faces, and was also unpainted at the very end of the board, with a thicker buildup of paint along those unpainted edges. This suggested to me that this fragment was from the end of one of the shelves. The unpainted back edge and unpainted end were the parts that had rested between the rows of closet wall paneling and had thus been protected from painting over the years. Examination of the end of the board revealed nailing evidence that suggested to me that the suspected shelf had been toe-nailed or nailed diagonally into the side wall of the closet. There were several nail holes at the end of the board, including one that still had the remnant of a wrought iron nail inside it. To test this theory, I created a simple tracing of the nailing pattern and compared it to the side walls of the closet at the sites where we suspected shelves had been. And I was able to positively locate the fragment within the closet based on corresponding nail holes at the left side of the second shelf from top. The front edge of this pieced together fragment could also be related to the surviving original material within the closet. The unpainted section, visible at the front edge on the left in the image above, would have been covered by the closet's door frame and thus be protected from painting campaigns. The remnant of a cut-off wrought iron nail can be seen just to the left of the paint line on the front edge. This should correspond with the location just past where the shelf extended behind the door frame. Examining the back of the door frame within the closet, the remnant of a nail was found within the witness of the shelf front, created by multiple generations of paint applied around the shelf, in a location that corresponded to the nail remnant in the front edge of the board, suggesting that the shelves had also been secured by nails driven through the closet door frame from the parlor side and into the front edge of the shelves. Examination of corresponding sites at other areas of the back of the door frame revealed evidence that all of the shelves had been nailed in through the door frame from the parlor. Examination of the applied casement molding surrounding the closet door on the parlor side, pictured at right, did not reveal any evidence, visual or magnetic, of nail heads or nail holes going through the casement molding at the sites in question. This suggests that the apparently original and untampered with casement molding was applied after the shelves were nailed in through the door frame from the parlor side, and that the shelves are therefore very likely original to the construction of the room as we know it. Also of interest were layout marks indicating the location of the bottom of the shelves on the back of the door frame, inscribed with an awl or similar tool. It seems very likely that these markings were used to help locate the shelves within the closet when the room was being built originally. As further evidence of the relationship between the suspected shelf fragments and the surviving panels within the closet, cross-sections of the shelf fragments analyzed by Kirsten Travers Moffat were compared with the cross-section from the closet wall panel, confirming a nearly identical paint history. In examining the closet back wall paneling for evidence of the original shelving configuration, it became apparent that the second from bottom row of panels had been shifted down to close the space between that row and the bottom row of panels. The space between the row in question, which that row is indicated by the red arrow above, and the row of panels above it was wider than the other spaces, and paint evidence on the side wall, where the space between now missing side panels had been painted, indicated with green arrows above, also suggested that the panels had been shifted down. I removed the shifted panels and found that they had been nailed on with cut nails common in the 19th century, rather than the wrought iron nails used in the rest of the closet construction, so later nails. The removal of the panels also revealed that the space between the bottom and second to bottom rows on the structural back wall had also been painted at some time when the row of panels was in its original position, as indicated by the green arrow above. In addition to the nail holes from the cut nails, which had been used to re-nail the shifted panels when they were moved down, there were also nail holes consistent with earlier wrought iron nails present on the backs of the panels. To be sure that I was repositioning those panels to their correct places, I traced the nailing patterns from the back of the removed panels on my layer. Cut nails traced in green and suspected wrought iron nails in red. When the transparencies were compared to the back of the closet and what I thought was the correct position, the nail holes in the closet back corresponded with the nailing pattern of suspected wrought iron nails transferred from the back of the panels. This confirmed that the row of panels had been shifted down at some point in the past, for as yet unknown reasons. The paint on the rough-sawn structural walls in the spaces where the shelves would have been housed, indicated again by a green arrow here, was also a bit of a mystery. It was only present within the housings for the two bottom shelves and was absent within the housings for the top two shelves, suggesting that the closet interior was painted overall in a cream or off-white color at some point when the side paneling was still intact, but the two bottom shelves had been removed, and the painter had painted within the shelf housings as well as on the surface of the panels. It appears that at some point, the two bottom shelves were removed and a row of coat hooks was installed below the two remaining upper shelves, evidenced by witnesses in the paint history and fastener holes, as shown by the red arrow above. One hypothesis is that the Fairmount Park guards could have converted the parlor closet to a coat closet around the time that Woodford became the East Park Guard House in 1887 by removing the bottom shelves and adding coat hooks, giving them convenient storage for their coats and hats. Although without further research, this is only a speculation. During the course of the project, we discovered that the pipes behind the left side wall of the closet were covered with asbestos insulation, and the city's asbestos inspector determined that they should be abated. In order for the city's abatement team to access the pipes, which ran up to the second floor of the house, I had to temporarily remove the top board and one side wall of the closet. This allowed for observations of the wall cavity between the parlor and Woodford's entry hall, seen in the images at right. It also resulted in some interesting discoveries that would not otherwise have come to light. The wall cavity above the closet was filled with early wooden fragments, plane shavings, and wood chips from rough axe work, likely offcuts and waste from the initial construction or early renovation of the house that had been allowed to fall or had been thrown into the wall cavity while the work was underway. Since the wall cavity space would have been inaccessible once the work was completed, it's not surprising that that area was essentially treated as a trash can. Among the debris was an especially interesting artifact, an early hand-forged chisel of a type similar to that illustrated in Joseph Moxon's 1677 Mechanic Exercises, a treatise on the various building trades in his section on house carpentry. This type of chisel, called a socket chisel, has a socket in the handle side of the blade that a wooden handle, broken off in this case, fits into. Socket chisels were often used for heavier work and could withstand greater abuse, opposed to tanged chisels, which were made with a spike or tang at the handle end of the blade that was driven into the wooden handle of the chisel and were used for finer work. The illustration on the left shows the difference between the two types of chisels. It was clear that the chisel I found had been used roughly and pounded on even after the handle had broken off. Perhaps it was lost during construction or dropped in the cavity between the walls and not considered worthy of retrieval. And interestingly, I don't have a picture, but Jeff also found another chisel outside during the renovation of the piazza. So it's pretty incredible to have these two artifacts of tools that were used in building or renovating Woodford from such an early time. Following my examination and documentation of all this new evidence, I stabilized the surviving wooden panels and paint using materials that can be reversed without damaging existing material in the future, if further study or treatment of the closet is ever necessary. The treatment also prioritized preserving as much original material and evidence of the history of the closet as possible, including and especially the paint history. I was very lucky to have so much evidence to inform my treatment, and I wanted to leave as much evidence as possible for the future while stabilizing the closet and bringing it closer to its original appearance and configuration. And I also fabricated replacements for the missing side panels and for the missing shelves using new wood, and installed those as well. Following my stabilization of original material and recreation and installation of missing side panels and shelves, the final step was to paint the closet interior to closely approximate the earliest blue paint layers. Consulting with Natalie Jan Erickson, owner of local Philadelphia paint distributor Earth and Flax, which specializes in linseed oil paints and other traditional finishing materials, I matched the earliest light blue color found on the surviving elements of the closet to the closest available color of natural linseed oil paint, in this case manufactured by Ottosson Paints in Sweden. As you can see here, it was a very close match. I chose to use linseed oil paint because it's very close materially to the earliest paints found on the closet, but without the toxic pigments originally used. It is made simply from linseed oil mixed with pigments, very much the same way that paints were manufactured in the 18th century, although using industrial processes, without the use of the petrochemicals that are ubiquitous in most contemporary architectural paints. The use of linseed oil paint results in a historically sympathetic surface quality that is impossible or very hard to achieve with petrochemical-based paints. So now that we've surveyed all the exciting material evidence and treatment choices, I'm very pleased to reveal the completed closet after treatment. It was a pleasure to work on this project, and I'm grateful to the Naomi Wood Trust and the team at Woodford for their commitment to and support of such in-depth research and documentation of this remarkable 18th century survival. I'll now hand the talk back over to Jeff for a discussion of the installation of objects in the restored closet.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, here you can see the restored Bowfat in Woodford's parlor, and we have installed a portion of our collection here. We have some English Delftware, some Chinese export porcelain, and some silver from the collection. And we have selected some representative examples of these as types of goods that would have been found in a Bowfat in the 18th century. And so we have both some silver made in Philadelphia by Philadelphia silversmiths and some imported from England. We have some English Delftware bowls, cups and saucers. And of course, we have some Chinese export porcelain bowls, plates, and cups as well. And there are a few 18th century wine bottles on the floor of the closet, as owners at the time might have wanted to have a couple extra bottles handy to enjoy themselves or share with their guests as needed. Thank you all for joining the presentation today, and we are happy at this time to answer any questions you might have.
You can write it in the chat to me. I don't see any questions yet, or you can also unmute yourself, however you'd like to. Any questions?
One thing I'll say while people, in case people are thinking of that stuff still, is that an issue that was confounding to us for quite some time is to try to understand what the original shelves might have looked like. Because as we started this project and when we realized that the original shelves were gone and we understood the types of Bowfats that existed, we really simply did not know whether the shelving would have had an elaborate scalloped edge or would have had a straight edge. And so we wanted to make sure that we were being as accurate as possible, but we didn't have evidence as to which choice had been made here at Woodford, and it was really kind of miraculous to us that in removing the 20th century material that Jonathan found these that the top two shelves had been cut up and used as spacing material, and so we're able to solve that conundrum and not have to add something that would have been purely speculative. And so I think it makes the final result all the more important that that we now know what that closet would have looked like. And you can see it in the context of the overall space, which is quite an elaborate Rococo parlor with a high coffered ceiling, some elaborate carving in the over mantelpiece, and something which says you could have gone either way. And so we actually know what it looked like then, and that's kind of very wonderful for us.
That's a really good point, Jeff. I had meant to mention that, and also another thing that we found that I didn't mention is that it's not a given that the shelves would have been painted. They could have been unpainted. They could have been painted a different color. They could have been painted only on their leading edge and unpainted elsewhere. But the evidence that we found showed that it had that earliest color on the tops, on the leading edge, on the bottom. And so that also informed the treatment and helped us, be as accurate as possible.
And I see that there is a hand raised.
Thank you. Two questions. One, further to what you just said, were you surprised that the inside of the closet was so plain? And my second question is the linseed oil and pigment combination used today in other projects?
So yeah, I think it is. In a way, it's surprising based on how kind of exquisite the mantle is, as you can see here, or if you're familiar with Woodford. But I think that even back when Woodford was built, they're still potentially making choices about what to lavish money on. And so, I'm just speculating, maybe the closet was not, they chose to lavish more money on carving the mantle than installing an ornate closet. And also the way, there's not as much depth here as you see in some of the other closets that we showed, like at Stenton or Mount Pleasant, where there's more room for kind of a rounded interior. So it's hard to know, but it's, I do think that it's notable. And then, with the linseed oil paint, that is being favored more and more for preservation projects, and especially for exterior work. So like, for example, the Palace of Versailles, I believe they use linseed oil paint for the restoration. So another benefit of it, which is not as big of a factor here, is that unlike petrochemical paints, latex, alkyd, those all trap water, and linseed oil paints allow more passage of water in and out of the wood. So they really are much more, in addition to having the look, they're much more durable. So I'm seeing those being favored more and more. And, they're more environmentally friendly. It's made of oil that comes from a plant and dirt or other pigments. So I think it's really a wonderful thing that I hope gains more steam.
Thank you. And is it commercially available?
It is, yeah. So if you're interested, the supplier that we used is called Earth and Flax. And if you just Google Earth and Flax linseed oil paint, they have a huge amount of information, and they carry different brands, and there are other brands besides the ones that they carry as well. So if you Google natural linseed oil paint, you'll find a lot, but Earth and Flax would be a good place to start if you're interested in learning more about that.
Great. And one last thing, I'm so sorry, but
no.
Do we know for sure that the closet doors were meant to be open?
I think that's hard to know for sure. And but I think that, Jeff, you can speak to this too, but it does seem that closets like this were used for storage, but also for display. And these would be expensive status symbols.
I think as one example of the fact of that, I would just say that we do know that items that were particularly valued, like Chinese export porcelain pieces, even if they were damaged and broken on one side, would be installed in Bowfats like this with the undamaged side shown outward, so that when guests came, they would still be showing a large collection or a substantial collection of a valuable and beautiful object. And so I kind of, from sources I've seen, it does seem that these were both had a practical use, just storing the objects used for dining and drinking, but then also a certain element of displaying the wealth that the families had.
Yeah, and if you didn't have guests, this is just speculating, but the closing the doors would prevent dust, keep your dishes clean, and it's also been suggested that you might have these on display when someone came over, and then when you were finished eating, could use the space to shut up your dirty dishes. So, I don't know if that's true or not, but those are suggestions that I've heard.
I see we have a question from Janine.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. It was mentioned that this Bowfat is shallower than many of the others in Philadelphia. I wonder if you could tell me how deep it is. I think it looks fabulous. You've done a great job dressing it out. Thank you. Bye.
Sure. So it's the width of the shelves, or the depth, is around 1 foot, maybe a little bit more. And there's actually been pretty significant settling and kind of shifting. So it's different widths at different places at this point, but it's around 1 foot.
And I would just add to that the shallowness of it did create some issues for us in setting it up for display because there was no evidence that there was a plate rail on the shelves. So in order to allow for some vertical display of some of the plates, we of course acquired modern plastic, clear plastic stands that those plates could sit on. For the larger Delft chargers at the bottom level, that brings them so close to the edge of the shelf that the only thing that we could install there were the Delftware and the Chinese export porcelain teacups and coffee cups, which don't take up that much space. And so it was a narrow space indeed. It is a narrow space indeed.
I have two questions in the chat. One is about the linseed oil again. The question is it reversible?
So it is. So that, yeah, the linseed oil is not easily reversible. So that, and any architectural paint that you use is not going to be like readily reversible the same way that some, like a lot of conservation materials that we use on objects are. But what I didn't go too far into the weeds of like how things were preserved, but every area that had the original paint revealed at areas of loss. So that light blue paint, that was first, the paint was stabilized and then covered with a barrier layer of an animal protein glue. So that those areas would be easily sort of undercut and dissolved if you had to get back to them. So the linseed oil paint does cross-link over time, so it becomes less and less soluble. But there are that animal protein glue layer and then also a primer that has a different solubility that's used under the linseed oil paint. So that even though that top layer is cross-linking and becoming less and less soluble, there are different systems of solubility so that you could get down to the original layers. And I think that's one of those conservation ethics questions. And I think in a case like this, using a commercially available paint that's very similar to what would have been used is preferable to some kind of synthetic that could be easily dissolved, but that looks like plasticky. And I think there is something in this case to be said for just the appearance. So, but great question.
The final question is, well, actually, we have a follow-up from the same person. What is the derivation of the term Bowfat?
It's kind of from my understanding, an early version of the word buffet in some ways. And in this period, we don't have a dedicated room for dining. That's not yet fashionable. And so these parlor spaces were used as a kind of multi-purpose space. They were simultaneously your home office. So we have secretary desk in here, a place where you could dine or take tea, and also a living room. And so floor space, the furnishings and furniture in this room is set up so that many things can be adjusted and moved against the walls. All the tables Our tilt-top tables can be pressed against the wall. The secretary can be closed up and to get when you're not using it for work. The chairs can be adjusted to move from a dining or tea-taking configuration into a living room configuration. And so there would not have been, and they did not have, things like a sideboard or a buffet table or a china closet at that time, because that would have taken up too much floor space in this room. And so this becomes the kind of built-in buffet. But how exactly it came about, I'm not sure, but that's what I understand about the origin of it.
All right, final question is, it's two-part. What started or kicked off this process of this project? And also, what is the next project?
Great question. Basically, in 2018, when we took over at Woodford, our trustee, Kristen Regina, came from being background as being a librarian and archivist, and so she was interested in the books and how they were displayed. And when she looked at the books and looked at this space, the books were basically 18th century books. They were leather bound, but they were in very poor condition. They had been damaged in a fire that took place at Woodford back in 2003. And they were very, the bindings were in very, very bad shape. And so as we pulled them out of the shelves, it was obvious that the shelf was 20th century. And she also said that 18th century books were generally smaller in size. And a shelf like this with these very large spaces between all of them, all the shelving, this wouldn't have been likely to have existed. And when we pulled it open, we could see there were metal brackets that ran the length of both sides that were the kind of adjustable metal brackets that you see it really only beginning in the 20th century. So it wasn't original. We knew that to be sure, for sure. And so once we knew that, we really wanted to figure out, well, how, what had been here before. And so that's what prompted us to start removing the 20th century material. And then when we did that, of course, we found the evidence of the 18th century Bowfat. In terms of next projects, I mean, there's always things to do at a house like this. We are interested in trying to do some work to make our gardens more authentically 18th century, and that's something that we're working on now. We've also been talking and thinking about trying to get some funding to restore the carriage house and do some repairs in the tenant's cottage. So those are the two dependencies outside of the mansion building. And they are original to the 1756, the original construction of the house. The tenant's cottage is still used by one of our caretaker couples, and it needs some repairs to windows and some structural repairs inside. And the carriage house needs a new roof, and also could use work to put back the openings for the original carriages and for the horses, which were covered over with masonry at some point in the property's history.
All right, any final questions before we conclude? I think that's it. So with that concludes our presentation. Thank you all for logging in.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you for joining us. And if you would
Thank
like
you.
to come see the Bowfat in person, we actually this Saturday are going to be having a free day, a free museum day as part of the Wawa Welcome to America celebration for the 4th of July. So we'll be open from 10 to 4, and Jonathan and I will be in the parlor so we can show you the Bowfat up close in person.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thanks.